Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today I am very excited to bring to you my interview with British writer Mike Carey. Mike has done so many things in his career, in comics, in novels, and beyond, but he is perhaps best known for his 75-issue run on Lucifer, which of course grew out of the Sandman series, but he's, as I said, worked on so many other different things. An adaptation of Neverwhere with Glenn Fabry, um, Wetworks, that's Will Spertazio's Image book, a lot of Ultimate Marvel books, including Elektra, Fantastic Four, Vision. Did some more work in Vertigo with Hellblazer, and then had a big run on X-Men. And that's not even to mention some of his creator-owned stuff like the Unwritten. So let's get to it. Let's dive into the mind of Mike Carey. Writer Mike Carey on the program. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for inviting me on, Mike.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. And as always, we'll kick you off with our first question, which is how did you first discover comics?
Wow, well, that's going back a bit. I read comics before I read anything else. I learned to read from comics. In the UK, there's a kind of great honorable tradition of like gag strips, comics composed entirely of one-page gag strips for little kids. We used to do dozens of these things: the Beano, the Dandy, the Topper, the Sparky, the Buster, the Shiver and Shake. They were everywhere. And when I was about 3 years old, there were three comics in particular, Wham, Pow, and Smash, known collectively as the Powerhouse comics. And they were written and drawn by two absolute masters of the medium, Ken Reed and Leo Baxendale. And I was completely hooked on this as a preschool kid. I was sort of sitting on my mum's knee, sort of spelling out "arg" with three A's and three R's, before I could spell words like cat and dog. Um, and then at a certain point in my childhood, my big brother Chris, I think just to make me go away, gave me a Fantastic Four annual. It was Lee and Kirby. It was the story where Reed, very early on in the run, Reed Richards is trapped in the negative zone, and they send Triton of the Inhumans in to rescue him, and it just blew the top of my head off. And basically, I've been, I was going to say I've been reading comics ever since, but that's not true. There was a point in my teens when I stopped, and Chris Claremont's X-Men drew me back in. I was just walking past a newsstand, and I saw an X-Men issue, and I didn't recognize any of the characters. So I picked it up on a whim and drew me back in again.
It's a very common trajectory. I've talked with so many people, and including myself, who take a break somewhere, usually in the late teenage, early, 20s years before coming back to comics. So it's interesting how that happens with so many readers.
Yeah, I thought I'd outgrown comics, but it turned out I hadn't.
So I read you were before you got into actually making comics, and maybe you had, some stories in a notebook somewhere, or you were actually doing something on the side, but you were teaching for a good amount of time before making it professionally into comics.
Yeah,
Did you ever, during that time, think that that was going to be the career that you would have for the rest of your life, or did you always have a nagging feeling that you wanted to do something a little different?
I always wanted to tell stories, and like from a very early age, I was doing that. I used to write and draw comics for my little brother Dave, on tiny scraps of paper. Our parents, were really into horse racing, betting on the horses,
Hmm.
and they would get from the turf accountants, from the gambling den, they would get these tiny sheets of paper which you were meant to write your selections for each race on, and I would do comics on those when I was about I guess 12, 13, and my brother was 8 or 9. Um, I used to steal exercise books from my school. I'm not proud of that, but and fill them with novels. Well, I thought of them as novels, always sci-fi or fantasy. Um, Writing for comics was a thing that hadn't particularly occurred to me because comics were sort of like something that happened a long, long way away. I didn't know how you would go about getting into that. But then I started, I guess I would have been in my 20s by this time. I started writing reviews and articles for fanzines, for
Mhm.
amateur magazines, produced on the ultra cheap. Um, and then through that, I got to meet people who were actually doing it, who were actually making comics, and I started pitching pitching ideas to them. And for a long time, I was sort of on the very, very fringes of the field, working with little tiny indie publishers, many of whom went bankrupt immediately after hiring me. Um, what Jonah does to ships in the Bible, I used to do to small publishers. But then, yeah, eventually I sort of drifted all the way through the sort of American indie market to DC. I was an overnight success in 10 years.
Yes, I've heard that before as well. That's also an interesting trajectory of lots of years of toil and labor, and then all of a sudden you're in it. You're in it,
And
and it's just going.
And you think all that time is wasted. You think, this is never going to happen, and all I'm doing here is like pouring good money after bad. But it's not wasted at all. You're kind of learning your craft. Every story that almost happened, you're
Sure.
still planning it, you're still writing it, you're still learning how to do it. So that when the ball does sort of like come down out of the sky and land in your hands, you can run with it.
Yeah. It sounds like there was not a great one day, one time decision making where all of a sudden you are, doing your day-to-day job, you're doing your teaching, and you decide here and now, I am now going to pursue comics. It seems like you were always doing that and always collecting these stories and pitching, and then just eventually, you sort of squirreled your way in. Is that right, or did you have some sort of epiphany that like I'm going to do it now? This is going to be I'm switching over. I'm going to be a writer.
I can remember there used to be when I was sort of like in my 20s and 30s, there was like one British Comic Con. And there was an organization called the Comic Artists Guild, the Comic Artists Collective. And they would have their own one day con before the public con. And they would invite any American creators or editors who were coming over for the con. They would invite them for this like meal and drinks the night beforehand. And I can remember going to one of these things and talking to Karen Berger, who was over in the UK. And I said jokingly that I was still looking for the big break. And she said, there's no such thing as the big break. She said, there's just this endless series of little breaks. And if you're lucky, at the end of that series, you're somewhere where you want to be. Um, so yeah, it was a very, very gradual process. And for an awful long time, it was just a hobby. It wasn't something I did for a living. It was something I did purely for the joy of it. Certainly wasn't making any money out of it. Um, and then there was this point around about the turn of the new millennium where I thought, actually, I can do this. Yeah, I can actually do this as the thing I do. Um, that was an epiphany, I guess.
And I read that some of your first professional um, comics that you wrote were heavy metal sort of biopics, not capital H, not capital HM, Heavy Metal the magazine, but actual actual bands and singers from that genre. And then, of course, 2000 AD stories, which I think are a rite of passage for any British writer breaking into comics. What
Yeah,
among those first, gigs and projects did you take in terms of learnings that you can look back on and sort of brought forward into what became your more mainstream career?
I think I my biggest problem when I started out was that there were no comic scripts available to be sort of like examined and copied. Now they're everywhere. You sort of go on the internet and type in Mark Millar script or Brian Bender script or Alan Moore script or whatever, and they'll just pop up. Um, but I started out not knowing how to do it, not knowing how other people had done it, and then the trade of Watchmen came out, and that had the script for issue one, the complete script for issue one of Watchmen in it. And I think maybe the same year or the year after, Sandman Dream Country came out, and it had the script for Dream. Was it Calliope? Or was it Dream of a Thousand Cats? It had one of those
I
scripts in.
don't
So
recall.
I had these two examples. And I thought, well, I'll do it like Alan Moore, because Alan Moore is he seems to be getting a fair amount of work. So I wrote these. I started out writing these like unbelievably over prescribed, super verbose scripts. And I think one of the things I learned early and the hard way was that if you're telling the artist every damn thing that's in the frame, you might as well tell them nothing because they have no way of knowing which of those things matter and which don't. So you need to strip it down. So I had cold water poured over my face very early on. I pitched a book to Apocalypse Press. I think it was their Trident Comics imprint, and the artist who they approached just like turned it down flat and said, "I'm not a monkey. I'm not a trained chimp. I don't need to be told all of these things. I don't need to be given like templates for where the panels go on the page." And I realized at that point that yeah, I was overdoing it. So I learned that lesson, less is more. And I think I learned that you got to trust the artist. The artist is going to have a better visual imagination than you are. So you tell the artist the effect you're going for, and you let the artist find a way to do it because that's their vocabulary.
Yeah, that's the basis of the collaborative nature of comics, which I would say coming from one end or the other probably is difficult until you're actually doing it, right? Whether you're a writer or an artist, you're just thinking about your particular part of the craft. And then you
Yeah,
have to come together and sort of figure it out.
and it's so different from any other kind of storytelling. We're not used to anymore. In the Victorian era, novels were written in periodic form. You get a chapter a chapter a month in a magazine, but nobody does that anymore. And, to tell an ongoing story in segments that are sort of like regularly sized and regularly spaced, it's a discipline that you can only learn by doing it, I think.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk Lucifer, one of your first and one of your biggest projects when you kind of crossed over to the mainstream, as it were. How did the original miniseries come about? Is it something you had an idea for, or was it something that was brought to you from DC? And, how much did you have invested in that character when you took it over or
So,
started it?
So all the while that I was working for Caliber, for Malibu, and then for Caliber, I was sending anything I managed to get published, I'd send it to Vertigo. And usually I would send it to Elisa Whitney because she was the editor on Sandman at that point in its run, the sort of latter half of its run. So I had send begging letters saying, "Let me work for you, please, please, please." And she wrote back eventually and said, "Well, we're launching this title off from the Sandman, this spin-off title called The Dreaming, which will be an anthology series. So pitch me some ideas for that." And I did. I pitched, I think, upwards of a dozen story ideas, and none of them gelled. And then, of course, The Dreaming became a continuity book with Caitlin Keenan writing it. And
Right.
so I thought, well, that's that then. I had my shot. I missed it. That's the end of the story. Um, but then I got a phone call one day, and it was Lisa, and she said, "Look, we're launching another Sandman spin-off, which will be called Sandman Presents, and we need a story. We need a story very, very quickly. It's going to have Lucifer as the protagonist. Be 3 issues. Do you want to write it?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, how much do you want to write it? Because we need like a synopsis in something like 3 days, and you'll be going to script if we like it. You'll be going to script straight away, and we'll need to script the first draft of the script in 2 weeks." I only found out much later that what had happened was they already had a Lucifer story in the works, and they commissioned a writer. Um, they'd liked the pitch, but they hadn't liked the script. For whatever reason, they decided that the script wasn't a good vehicle for Lucifer, or wasn't a good launch point for the imprint for the series. So they paid that other writer off, and they decided to get in a pinch hitter at the last moment, at the kind of like the 11th hour. So that's what I meant earlier when I said the ball just lands in your hands, and you have to run. Um, so I said, yeah, I'll do it, I'll do it, and then I put together an idea by not sleeping for 2 days. Um, it was approved. It was approved by Karen. It was approved by I think Paul Levitz, looking over her shoulder. It was the publisher at DC at the time. Um, I, 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 I have to say I wasn't at that point particularly invested in Lucifer as a character, but I loved Sandman as a book. Absolutely adored it. It seemed to me that it was doing something with long form comic storytelling that no one had ever done before. I mean, you could argue that Alan Moore was doing it in Swamp Thing, um, but Sandman is just like it's a novel. It's a novel over 75 issues. So the chance to play with it, play in that sandbox, no pun intended, was it was a dream come true. It was an incredible opportunity. And of course, I came to love Lucifer as I wrote him. I decided quite early on that my Lucifer would not be the incarnation of evil. He'd just be the incarnation of will, the force of will. Somebody who is just determined to be himself at any cost. And if anybody gets in his way, he will walk over them, but not because he particularly takes any pleasure in that, just because they're in his way. And his way is the only way that matters.
When you first got the miniseries, which you were, obviously very fortunate to be able to hop onto and write in a short amount of time, did you ever think in your wildest dreams, first of all, that there would be an ongoing series that you would be asked to write, and then that you would write it and it would go for, 75, more than 75 issues?
No, no, I was very, very far from sort of imagining any of that. I mean, I was hoping, this would be my foot in the door, that I would be able to sort of negotiate it into more work. And so I took the plunge after I'd given the third script in. I went over to San Diego that year for the first time ever. I stopped in New York and visited the DC offices. Um, Met Elisa there, and she said, I'm not going to San Diego this year, but Shelley Roberg is there. Introduce yourself to her and pitch some ideas to her, which I did. And initially, we didn't hit it off at all. I think Shelley was a bit annoyed being told she had to look after this gormless Brit. Um, so we had an inconclusive meeting in the food court. Um, and what sort of saved me there was that one of the last things Elisa did before she left there to go on maternity leave was she commissioned a short story from me for Flinch, the very short-lived Vertigo horror anthology, a short story called The Wedding Breakfast, and it was on Shelley's desk. It had landed on Shelley's desk when Elisa left. And she called me up a couple of weeks later and said, I really like this, and I've got the perfect artist for it. And what else? What else have you got in your locker? And I went through a lot of sort of pitches before we landed on the Lucifer, the idea of a Lucifer monthly. Initially, nobody thought that the character would sustain a monthly because he's kind of in a way he's kind of too big for some kinds of story because he's virtually omnipotent. There are a lot of things that you can't do with him in a fictive context. But I kind of pastiched Gaiman. If you look at Sandman, Morpheus is very often the catalyst for other people's stories. And I did the same thing with Lucifer. There were some reviewers said, "Why is this book called Lucifer when he's never in it?" Because in a lot of cases he's sort of like at the edges of the story, and it's other people who are sort of at the center of the frame.
Well, that's interesting because, like you said, the Sandman sort of began or created that template in terms of the Sandman being the thread that connects sometimes disparate stories.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't Lucifer be sort of the same in that way? So it's surprising that people would be like, "Why isn't Lucifer?" Well, have you read Sandman?
There was review site called The Fourth Rail, and one of the reviewers there picked up Lucifer, I think, in its third year, and was baffled by it because, yeah, he was expecting something completely different. Dutifully reviewed every issue, and every issue said, "Where is Lucifer?"
Well, I guess
He,
there's
he
some baggage with the title, right?
yeah, yeah,
Sandman, you can, I think there's a little less definition around the name Sandman. I mean, you would have to say, okay, it has something to do with dreams, and so okay, it can be ethereal and talking about stories as dreams. Lucifer, I think, comes in there just as purely as a title with a lot of baggage
yeah.
that people and a lot of preconceived notions, I think, that people would have just picking it up off the newsstand. I mean, was
And,
that something of a challenge that you consciously thought about, or only in retrospect?
Um, only in retrospect, really. I mean, I mean, it's a big challenge sort of following in the footsteps of Sandman. It helped that Dreaming had gone first. And I had certain freedoms that Caitlin didn't have with the Dreaming. I think she was initially told that she couldn't use any of the Endless as characters. They couldn't appear in panels. And there was a scene where there was a banquet in the Dreaming, and Morpheus is at the table, but you never get to see him. You get to see the people around him, and
Right.
sometimes they'll talk to him, but he's always just off the edge. Um, I didn't have those strictures. I was using. I mean, I kind of had another model in mind. There's a British poet of the early 19th century, William Blake,
Hmm.
who wrote an absolutely amazing book, mingled poetry and prose, called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Um, and he basically makes Lucifer, or he doesn't call him Lucifer, he calls him Satan or the adversary, but he basically makes that figure be the hero of the biblical narrative. Um, Blake was a dissenter. He belonged to a sort of an odd fringe religion, um, and he felt that the biblical God is kind of a negative power, a power that only forbids, a power that prohibits, and that the Satan is sort of like the indomitable spirit of rebellion. And bear in mind, 19th century Europe, hotbed of rebellion. Rebellions going on everywhere, revolutions going on everywhere. So Blake said not only was Lucifer the hero, the narrative for him, he said he always has been for other writers as well. He said Milton's Paradise Lost. Satan is the hero because Milton was a poet and therefore he was of the devil's poet, the devil's party, whether he knew it or not.
He's almost you know, the most powerful underdog you can think of.
That's a lovely, that's a lovely way of putting it. Yeah, and yeah, he wants something that he can never have. He wants to be his own parent, his own author. He wants to have absolute freedom of action. And his dad is God, so not going to happen. And that's kind of like the dramatic tension that holds the whole series together. And
When you were writing all of these issues, were you plotting extensively, or were you more discovering the story or the plot even as you were writing it? Or was it a mix?
it was a mix. It was kind of it was kind of fractal, really. When I pitched it, I think I'm right in saying my original pitch had the ending in it. It didn't have much of the middle in it. But I said, we're going to build towards, if we get the chance to do this, we're going to build towards a second war in heaven, a second war between heaven and hell. And Lucifer will be on the wrong side. He will be fighting for heaven. Um, and I sketched out a few of the sort of arcs for the supporting characters. But most of the sort of the meat of the story in the middle was stuff that we made up as we went along. And I think that's how you kind of have to do it, really. Um, you need to know what the end point is going to be, because otherwise the story's not going to have any shape. But you can let it take shape in a more organic way, I think. A lot of things just happen because they happen. There were characters like two examples: Gaudium, the little fallen cherub. and the centaurs, the centaur sorceresses,
Hmm.
Issa Hayne, and they're all in the same family, but many generations apart. Those things happen because Peter just drew a gorgeous little cherub, a gorgeous little monster cherub gargoyle figure, and a wonderful centaur woman. And I thought, I want to go back to these characters because I want him to keep drawing them. And yeah, there were an awful lot of things like that where we just hit on something and then we decide we liked it and we'd carry on with it. But because we always knew where we were going in the longer term, I think the story sort of kept its shape. I hope it kept its shape.
I believe it did. And I like though that there was the freedom of discovery within that middle piece, that you knew where you were going, but you were also, you can take pieces of art and make stories and characters out of them, and things that maybe happened in your life that week or month or what have you, you can weave in, as long as you were serving the story. So I mean, that just sounds like a almost a dream project, right out of kind of right out of the gate. I mean, I imagine you didn't have a lot of constraint from Vertigo on the title, did you?
No, not really. Neil Gaiman was creative consultant on the series and got to see all of the scripts as they came in. Got to see all of the sort of the planning documents. I would typically do a couple of like overviews a year. Like saying the next 6 issues will be sort of
Right.
these stories and they'll involve these characters. I only ever got two ideas bounced. One of them was a story involving Rose Walker, and I was told that if Neil Gaiman ever came back to Sandman, it would be Rose Walker's story that he would tell. So hands off. And then the other one was just a piece of dialogue between Lucifer and Death, where Lucifer says, "You have no claim on me," and Death says, "To be honest, wouldn't know where to put you." And the note there was, Death does not have a domain. All of the other endless have, a realm of their own. Death
Right.
doesn't. Death is a psychopomp. She takes you from here to here. Um, but yeah, apart from that, no constraints at all. I got censored once. I had an issue involving a punk rock band,
Hmm.
and I invented a silly lyric for them. Are we allowed to swear, Mike?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I
It's
invented this.
encouraged.
Okay, good. I invented a silly lyric, which was George fucking Bush married Tony fucking Blair. The church was made of corpses and the cake was pubic hair, which, it's not political, it's just scatological. But Shelley decided we couldn't go there. So she changed the names. She changed the names to George Rush and Tony Lair or something like that, which I thought was very sad. But yeah, I can't
Just
complain.
a step too far.
I can't, I mean that was the worst thing it got in terms of censorship. So yeah, I had an enormous amount of creative freedom. And yeah, it was a dream come true. I absolutely loved working on that book. It was the first monthly series I'd ever written, and I was learning on the job, and yeah, I was just high on my own supply.
Well, you've done a lot of other projects beyond Lucifer, even though I love that one to death, and could keep talking about it for the entire conversation. But I just wanted to touch on a couple. One was the Neverwhere adaptation with Glenn Fabry. Um, and this was, I think, during maybe in between while you were working on Lucifer or shortly thereafter. Um, did you like, and I don't know if you've done this before, I guess maybe in those musical bio thing, but the process of adaptation, which I always find fascinating, especially in the comics medium, was first of all, it was working on another, game and property, but did you enjoy that? Did you seek out adaptation? And what did you think about that process of moving from prose into comics?
I didn't seek it out. I had it offered to me by the editor Jonathan Vankin. Um, but again, I loved the book and the chance to work with Glenn, who at that time was mostly doing covers. It had been quite a while since he'd done any sequential art. So Yeah, I wanted to be part of that. Um, Adaptation is fascinating. I'd already done it once at Marvel. I'd done the comic of the movie of the first Fantastic Four,
Okay. Yep.
which was odd, which was a very odd thing because I was working on an early draft of the movie screenplay, and it arrived under courier with every single page stamped Mike Carey copy, so that I couldn't sell it
Right.
online. Um, or photocopier. Neverwhere was different because I actually enjoyed the story. It was, I think we didn't get everything right. I think some of the decisions we made, because adaptation, you can't do it scene for scene faithfully. You have to dismantle the story, look at what each bit is doing, and then put it back together again. Um, and we made the decision to have Richard Mayhew be the first person narrator all the way through. Whereas, of course, the book doesn't have a first-person narrator; it's omniscient. Um, but you kind of can't do omniscient overview captions in a comic. I mean, you can, but it looks odd and it looks dated.
Right.
So we wanted a point of view, and the point of view that made sense was Richard's. Even though, of course, doing that means that you know he's going to survive. So in some ways, it's controversial. Some readers didn't like that. And the other thing that we did, the big structural change we made, was that they in the original book they go to Islington's citadel twice, and I just had this feeling that it wouldn't work, that it turns the quest into a circle rather than a kind of linear progress. So I had their first real meeting with Islington be in a kind of a sort of otherworldly space. It's almost like a spiritual vision of him that they have, rather than a physical meeting. Um, but I really relished it. It was great, sort of decanting that story into a new medium and sort of unlocking the visual potential of a lot of those scenes. So with Down Street, even though Down Street is a real abandoned London Underground station and it's very banal, it's very ordinary. But we decided now, the hell with it. We'll make it be sort of 90 degrees to the rest of reality.
Yeah.
Um, I have that page. There's the splash page where they're sort of standing, looking down this vertical street. Glenn sent it to me after we'd finished working on the book, and it sits above my desk. It's a lovely thing.
Wow. Fringe benefits.
Yeah, yeah, really.
Um, I'm also curious about your work on Wetworks, which at this point seems like you know, what would be a 180-degree, turn from what you were doing. How did that arrive in your inbox? I was assuming that you were pursued for this, unless you're going to tell me that you sort of went after this or talked to Wilson, said I want to do some Wetworks. But what did you find in that assignment and in those characters that you could put your stamp on?
Well, I wanted at that point I really wanted to write some superhero books. I was having a great time at Vertigo, but I'd grown up on superhero books and I wanted to sort of, and they are the mainstream of the medium as far as the American market goes. And I wanted to sort of like try my hand at it. And I've been sort of like knocking on the door at DC for ages. I'd sent in Superman pictures, Batman pictures, Firestorm pictures, and nothing ever got accepted. There was a kind of there was a sort of Chinese war between the DCU and Vertigo, and it was hard. Certainly as a writer, it was hard to sort of break through that. You were perceived as belonging on one
Right.
side of the divide or the other. Um, and then, yeah, Will asked me if I wanted to do some web works. And I have to confess, I'd never read the original book. So I went away and read it and thought, this is kind of a fairly open sort of conceptual space. It's superhero horror. You can do whatever you like with that. Um, and I just invented this nutty team. I think it was my run on Wetworks was a complete artistic failure, and I think it's a failure because I assumed that everybody who was coming to read it would have read all of the original series and would have read it recently, and so I just assumed all of this knowledge would be there. So I told the story way too elliptically. I just left lots of things unsaid that needed to be said. So I'm not that proud of my Wetworks run. I think also, it was a bigger trend, a bigger jump than I thought it would be, uh, which means it was good in the longer term because it meant that when I got to write superheroes at Marvel, I'd already kind of got my feet wet and I had a better sense of what I was doing.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like that was the silver lining. Even if you were not satisfied with the work you put out, you learned something, and it was a kind of maybe a transition
Yeah,
project
yeah.
from Vertigo to the more mainstream superheroes.
I think the only thing that works about that run, there's a character Simon Vasca, with the sort of the evil vampire from another dimension,
Yes.
um, and there's a prison break story involving him. I thought that was okay. I think most of the rest of it was just just didn't work, didn't hold.
Hmm. Well, was it interesting that you were, well, the lesson you took from that, that maybe things were unsaid and you didn't start at the, maybe not the beginning, but sort of as at a more foundational or basic level for new readers, because when you did go to Marvel, the first playground you were playing with is the Ultimate, universe, which is kind of a reset universe that takes, established continuity, well, puts it to the side, I guess, and telling these stories with a new, I guess, modern sensibility. So, what was that something that attracted you to these ultimate projects, that you didn't have that baggage going into them?
It was great. What I loved there was that you could choose which baggage you took in. I took my brief on Ultimate FF to be go back and reread Stan and Jack and take the stuff you loved from those
Right.
issues and reinvent that. So I would go for like villains who who'd always meant something to me as a kid, like the Red Ghost, and do the ultimate version of those characters. That was fun. I also, in my first arc on Ultimate FF God War, I'm also stealing from. So stealing is the wrong word. Borrowing from the Fourth World books, which
Yeah.
yeah, which I had been absolutely infatuated by in my teens. So yeah, it was a sort of case of being selectively taking the baggage on board. Um, it did definitely help that there weren't thousands of pages, thousands of issues of continuity. Although then I moved into X-Men where there were thousands of issues of continuity.
Uh, One more question on the ultimate. So you talked about FF, and that was probably, one that you were very excited to have. And maybe not these were you were not excited to have, but Elektra and Vision are, I guess more peripheral characters. What did you think going into those books in terms of taking these peripheral characters and redefining them as you were with FF? Was it sort of the same approach in terms of taking what worked and putting it in, or did you really want to take those more back to nuts and bolts?
It was different. It was different because there was almost nothing to build on in Ultimate Electra and Daredevil. There had been the 5 issue. Was it Greg Rucka who did the original one? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Um, and
I
and so
believe so.
all I had to nod to were a few sort of aspects of Matt Murdock's backstory, and there was nothing on Elektra. Um, so that was really just a straightforward sequel to a really good Daredevil story. Um, there was that very little world building really, as with all sort of Daredevil and Elektra stories, it focuses on the kind of love-hate relationship, the attraction and the antagonism between them. But younger versions of them that haven't had the rough edges knocked off yet. So that was fun.
Right.
Ultimate Vision is just like a big sci-fi epic thing, which is all. It's almost there's almost no superhero dimension to it. It has Falcon in. Is Falcon the only superpowered character in it? I think he might be. And it has the Vision herself slash itself. Um, I just sort of like cut loose and did that as pure sci-fi.
Well, let's dive into the aforementioned X-Men, where you had another, huge run. I'd have to go back and look at the actual numbers. I think perhaps bigger. Did you write more issues of X-Men than Lucifer?
I think in terms of pages, page count, it just edges out Lucifer. Yeah.
Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. How did it all come about? Was it based on your success in these aforementioned Ultimate comics?
I'm not sure how successful I was with the Ultimate books, to be honest. My Ultimate FF run got very sort of mixed reviews. But I guess I was trying. Yeah, I guess from the point of view of the Marvel editors, that they were trial runs, and I must have done something right because Mike Martz called me up and said, "Do you want to write X-Men?" I didn't think it was Mike Martz actually. I thought that somebody else I knew was playing games with me, and I almost told him to fuck off. I'm glad I didn't. That would have been a tactical error. Um,
I
it was
believe so.
it was a great time to get on board. I mean, in some ways it was hard because House of M had just happened, so there'd been the decimation. There were only a tiny number of mutants left, but um, Ed Brubaker was taking over on Uncanny, and he got to choose his 5 or 6 mutants, and I was told you can have anybody else, anybody you like, and I thought I'll have all of them. Um, so as my run went on, I just kept stealing more and more characters, especially once it became Legacy and Rogue stepped into the lead role. The roster around it changes from arc to arc, and it was just yeah, any character that nobody was using, any character that had just been lying on the shelf for a long time, I thought I'll bring them back and I'll play with them.
What were some of, I mean, I guess we can look back on your run and see which appeared the most, but which were the most fun writing aside from Rogue, who I suppose you had a special affinity for?
I did, yeah. I loved writing Rogue. I loved writing Cyclops. Cyclops and Emma are great, and even though they were in Uncanny, they got to come into Legacy a fair bit. I enjoyed the relationship between those two. I picked up Ariel from Fallen Angels, who'd
Mhm.
always been this kind of like it always struck me as a kind of a very sort of very vain and empty-headed character, and I played into those aspects of her personality a lot more in my run. I end up giving her some sort of big moments in the crossovers. Um, I mean, Indra, I used Indra a fair bit. I had a whole bunch where they go back to India because he's meant to be getting married. A lot of younger mutants. I had Rogue's role sort of morph into being a kind of teacher counselor for for young mutants who are having a hard time of it, and use that to sort of shovel in a whole bunch of less central characters. It was again, it was just a joy really. X-Men was one of the first comics I'd ever loved as a kid, and then and being able to sort of add chapters to that story, it really did feel like you're helping to build stories or rooms in a house that you used to live in as a child. Um, the first arc I ever did had introduced a new group of villains called the Children of the Vault, who were post-humans, but they weren't mutants. They were a different kind of post-human. Um, and about, I don't know, maybe 2, 3 months after the first issue came out, someone sent me a link to a Wikipedia article for the Children of the Vault. It had become canon. And it was just, it was just one of the best moments. I just felt so happy about that.
It's like you're a proud papa of a creation, you know?
Yeah.
It lives on and appropriately renamed. I'm curious actually about that renaming. It makes sense the way you're describing a lot of your run there, especially in terms of Rogue mentoring younger mutants, why it would be called Legacy. But I'm curious how that decision came about and whether you were the one that had input into that subtitle or just came from editorial.
No, it came from, I mean, it came from Messiah Complex. It came from, so at that point, Marvel used to fly us all over either to New York or to Marvel West twice a year. Us being the writers and the editors on the books, and just like lock us in a room for 3 days, and we'd thrash out the next big crossover, which was a great way to do it. Yeah, everybody ended up feeling a sense of ownership
Mm.
of what was about to happen. But I'd kind of deliberately given Rogue. So here was my theory for Rogue's team, the original team, when I took over the book. I thought there's going to be a stable core. The stable core is Rogue, Iceman, and Cannonball. And then there's going to be an unstable core, which is uh, Mystique and Lady Mastermind and Sabretooth. And then Karima Shapanda comes on board, and Nathan Gray comes on board. Um, but that was the original plan. But it was always a team that was kind of like going to be driven by the tensions, the kind of unworkable character dynamics. That was my idea, that it's a team that's already falling apart before it even sort of meets a bad guy. Um, and the logic of Messiah Complex really demanded that the team completely implode, that it just like tear itself apart in a really ugly way, which I thought was fun to do. It was a fun story to tell, but it left me with nothing. It left me without a book. If I have a regret, it's that I didn't get, like, I would have loved to have another year with just that original team. Another maybe three or four arcs of them. Um, but yeah, so I was left with nowhere to go really, and I was talking to Mike. He said we don't want it to be another team book. We don't feel like we're going to need another team book going forward. Can you recast it in another way? Um, and so I came up with this idea of, Professor X had just been shot in the head, um, had seemed to be dead, but wasn't dead because nobody ever is. And I thought, well, could we use that as a way of like taking him back to his roots and like using him as an index to like as a key to open up an awful lot of like unfinished business in X-Men continuity, which was taking on a lot because there was a lot of continuity in there. Um, and yeah, they approved it, and they said, well, what should we call it? And I said, call it Legacy. Um, and I got to pay that off in a really nice way in my last ever arc, which was Age of X, in which in an alternate universe, Rogue isn't Rogue; she's Legacy. That's her name
Mm.
because she contains the memories of dead mutants.
Well, very cool. Did you have that like you did the sort of ending of Lucifer in your mind that you would get there, or that just kind of another nice discovery along the way?
That just happened. That just happened. But yeah, I mean, the Age of X was a great note to go out on. I actually wrote a couple of arcs after Age of X, but Age of X was kind of like, I guess, the pinnacle really. And I pitched it as just a 3-issue arc, and then it grew. I managed to take over 3 issues of New Mutants. They gave me an alpha issue. So it grew into something really satisfying.
You had, like you have throughout your career, a number of great artists on your X-Men run. More than one. One couldn't possibly, do the art for every single book that you wrote. Was each collaboration with those artists different, or was there kind of a shared qualities in terms of your approach with them?
I don't think so. I do write differently for some artists. There's some artists that I know really well. So I write differently for Peter Gross than I do for anybody else, and I write differently for Mike Perkins than I do for anybody else. Um, as you say, there were a lot of sort of changes to the artistic roster on X-Men, and it was fantastic working with all of those talents. But I didn't sort of work with anybody long enough to sort of adapt my style to their strength particularly. So in some cases it was just a question of writing in my with my usual sort of quite fully, quite detailed approach and then seeing what came of it. Um, and what came of it was always great. You know, working with Bachelor particularly. I never knew what would come, but I knew that what came would be jaw-dropping, so that was fine.
I wanted to move on to some of your creator-owned work because you just mentioned Peter Gross, and a book you wrote was called The Unwritten, which kind of delved into the power of stories and fiction. What inspired you maybe to tackle those themes or to even develop this concept?
That book had a really, really strange origin. Um, so in the last year of Lucifer, Peter and I, you know, we've been working together for 6 years. We were really enjoying working together. I think he's a storytelling genius. And I think he sort of like brought out the best in me as a storyteller. Um, and I said, well, yeah, let's do something else together. So we pitched a lot of ideas to Shelley. One of them actually got greenlit. It was called Dead Easy, and it was about a kind of a weird phenomenon where people start a mark would appear on your face, and the mark would mean you only have 24 hours to live. At the end of exactly 24 hours from the appearance of the mark, you die. And initially, it was going to be an anthology book about what do people do with the last day of their lives. But then there's a detective who's trying to find out where the mark comes from and what power is behind it. And that got greenlit. And then at the last moment, we were told, no, it hasn't been greenlit, and we were stood down again. Um, and we were really a bit disillusioned at that point. But that summer, I went to San Diego. Peter was there, and Pornsack was there. Pornsack Pichette showed,
Hmm.
who'd been our editor on a couple of things. Um, and we had some very, very enjoyable drunken chats in the bar. Um, and Peter had an idea for a story that would follow the same character in real life and in a fiction. This character would be the inspiration for a fictional version of their life, and the story would be about the difference between the reality and the fiction. And I had an idea for a story that would be about the magic trumpet, the golden trumpet, which in Hindu mythology sounds when one age of the world ends and another age begins. And my story was going to be about someone who finds this thing and blows it and like completely rearranges reality without meaning to. And Pornsack said, well, why don't you just put them together? You know, make them be one story. And I said, ha ha ha, yeah, sure. Um, but uh, when we went home, he said, don't stop talking, carry on talking. And the other magic ingredient was I was reading the autobiography of Christopher Milne, who is the Christopher Robin of Winnie the Pooh, um, and who really hated the fact that his father had turned him into a fictional character. And I saw the reflection of Peter's idea through that lens, refraction through that lens. Um, and that was where, you know, we talked it over on the phone, and Tommy Taylor was born. And we pitched it, and it got accepted. And it turned out to have a run as long as Lucifer's. It was another really, really enjoyable collaboration for us.
Excellent.
It got it allowed Peter to do some outrageous things with his style. There was an issue quite near the end of the run where Thomas died and he comes back to life, but he comes back to life through fiction, and specifically through children's fiction. He walks through like hundreds and hundreds of children's stories. And Peter changes his art from page to page. So there's an Aesop's fable in there. There's uh, Rudyard Kipling's Rikki Tikki Tavi. There's the Hundred Acre Wood. There's Alice in Wonderland, and he just adapts his style as Tom walks from world to world. It's the most incredible issue, and he gave me again. Yeah, I got a really nice gift out of it. He sent me a kind of artist edition of the whole issue, like with each page sort of printed A3, which is one of my proudest possessions.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a hugely fulfilling project, and especially to get, so many issues out of it and, be able to do what you want is quite the boon, I would
Yeah,
say. You've also, speaking of, creator-owned properties, done a number of novels, and especially the ones that are more creator-owned would be the Felix Castor series. What made you want to dip your toe into prose, and what do you find to be the advantages and disadvantages of prose versus comics?
So I started out with prose before I wrote comics, but I
Okay,
never managed to get anything published. For the simple reason that my prose was terrible. Um,
that'll do it.
Terrible in terms of structure. I had no idea how to plan
Yeah.
a story. This is when I was in my teens and 20s. So my approach to storytelling was just write chapter one, have a cup of tea, write chapter two, have two cups of tea. Keep on going until you get to something that feels a little bit endy and write the end. So they were just these big shapeless bags of story. And I'd send them to publishers and I'd get rejection slips that said, you should try writing this as a novel. Um, I just had no idea how to go about it. And comics were kind of like the salvation of me because I mean, not just in terms of the joy I had in doing it for its own sake, but also because it taught me about structure. If you're writing a comic, you've got a canvas which is this big, not that big, and not that big. It's a fixed size. And if you run out of pages before you run out of story, then you're stuffed. So you kind of have to become a miser. You have to think, how many pages does this scene really need? If I do it in one, I can have a splash over there. So you start very consciously making those decisions, which meant that bouncing back out of that into writing prose, I was able to use the freedom a lot more effectively because the canvas is as big or as small as you want it to be in a novel. Nobody's going to chide you for going like 10,000 or 20,000 words over. Um, in terms of the sort of the advantages and disadvantages, I don't know. I think each medium is a different toolbox for storytelling, and I think working in different media keeps you fresh as a creator. I think it's a real blessing to be able to work in different media because it's sort of like you're constantly shifting your perspective. You're making the same creative decisions, but you're making them in different ways and using different implements to realize them. And I think that stops you from sort of the trap that you can fall into as a writer is telling the same story again and again with different furniture. And I think that's a deadly trap. And I think also you might be the last person to realize it. I think your readers are going to notice that before you do. You'll still think you're doing fresh things, and actually you're just doing retreads. Um, so yeah, comics were also my calling card. The Felix Castor books. The character of Felix Castor starts off as John Constantine. I think he becomes something a little bit different, a little bit more like with other things in the mix. But I basically showed my editor Darren some of the issues of Hellblazer that I've been writing, and said it will be that, but without the.
Mm,
And he said, "Yeah, all right, that'd be good." He was already a big comics fan, so that helped.
yeah. Well, Hellblazer is an interesting book, because I think, like 2000 AD, it's become, and maybe not so much anymore. I haven't delved into it, but kind of a rite of passage, or a everybody has to do their run on
Yeah.
Hellblazer to really kind of establish themselves. Did you sort of feel that when you took on John Constantine?
What I thought was this. John is kind of Vertigo's Batman in the sense that everybody writes him differently. Everybody wants to put their own mark on him, but there's something about the character that always shows through somehow. There's a core of Johnness that doesn't
Yeah,
change. So you change the furniture, you change the supporting cast. Very often you change the setting. I mean, Brian Azzarello had just taken him off to the States.
yeah.
Which was a smart move, I think. And I brought him back, which was a smart move for me. I kind of approached it by, in a certain sense, by giving him chunks of my childhood because I was like John, I was a Liverpudlian living in London. Somebody had sort of come to London sort of in my mid-teens and never left, as in late teens. So when I took John back to Liverpool, to Everton Valley, I was sort of referencing things in my own life and using them as a jumping off point for the stories.
And uh, are there other projects like that? And like I mean, you've done so many different books and so many different characters. Are there others that you would jump at the chance to do that you haven't really gotten to?
Not so much anymore. For a long time, I really had a yen to write a Doctor Strange story. And I wanted to do it like Ditko. I wanted to do a Doctor Strange story where magic is like a physical thing that's sort of like, there are bolts of magic and shields of magic and
Right.
so on. The magic is as a physical element on the page. I never got to do that, but I did a book with Mike Perkins called Spellbinders, um,
Yes. Yeah.
which has its own magic system that kind of scratched that itch.
Yeah.
Every kind of magic has a different sort of sigil associated with it, a different color scheme. So that as you go through the story, if you've been paying attention, you can tell exactly what spell is being cast and what it will do. So I don't feel like I've missed out on anything now. No, I when goddamn uh Jonathan Hickman took over
Mm.
on X-Men. He asked me if I wanted to write a Children of the Vault story because he was going to bring them back into continuity. And I really, really wanted to do it, but I couldn't because I just had other stuff going on and I couldn't free the time to get up to speed on what was happening. Yeah, I'd read House of X, and I thought, yeah, what he's doing is incredible, and it would be wonderful to be a part of it, but I just couldn't. I couldn't make it happen. So that's a regret. But yeah, apart from that, no.
First say never. Things have a way of coming back around.
That's true. That is true.
So, if not Children of the Vault or Doctor Strange, what are you working on nowadays that we can look forward to?
So I wrote last year and the year before. I had two science fiction novels that were sort of multiverse novels. Um, it's about a sort of gigantic war between two empires, and each empire is composed of thousands of alternate Earths. One of them is a machine culture, like an artificial intelligence culture,
Mhm.
with a machine hive mind. Every single sort of robotic entity is part of the same consciousness. And the other is called the Pandemonium. It's sort of like the European Union. It's a big trading alliance, really. It's just about commercial advantage. But they also have a huge a standing army of like hundreds of millions of soldiers. Um, and they did quite well. And there was a duology. It was two stories that sort of like eventually wrapped up, but I wanted to go back and do something else in that against that backdrop. So I've got a novel coming out in I think October called Outlaw Planet, which is basically the Outlaw Josie Wales. It's that Clint Eastwood Western, but the main character is a hybrid a dog human hybrid dog human called Dog Bitch Bess. I'm very proud of that. Very happy with that. Um, I'm currently working on a retelling of a Hans Christian Andersen short story, The Tinderbox. A story about a cashiered soldier, a wounded ex-soldier who finds this magical tinderbox, and there are three demons that live in the box that will grant your every wish. But there's a witch that also wants the box. I'm doing my own version of that. Um, I'm doing a vampire book from Bad Idea, which comes out this August, with art by Jonathan Weishak, which is just the most gorgeous, insane thing. The style that he's sort of developed in this book, it's a little bit Sienkiewicz, but it's just astonishing. Um, what else have I been doing? Ghost Box for Mad Cave, for Comicsology, Mad Cave with Pablo Raimondi, which again is a sort of horror or dark fantasy concept about a box full of ghosts and some people who want to steal it. So I've got quite a lot of things on, really, one way and another. And I'm really happy to be sort of coming back into comics after a little bit of
Yeah.
a hiatus.
And we're back. Mike is a fountain of creativity, much like a lot of the guests we have on our program. I really enjoyed getting to know him and his work and asking a lot of questions about his process. Be on the lookout for all of the new Mike Carey stuff on the way, including maybe more novels of Felix Castor, and comics, comics, comics. So that'll do it for this episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, supporting this show. You can go to Dollar Bin Boosters on Patreon. Please check us out there. Subscribe. We have some interesting bonus stuff going on that you don't want to miss. But that'll do it for this episode, and we'll see you next issue.